Thank you, Michelle. Oh, wonderful. So we hear that the recording has started. It's really a pleasure to be with you all this morning. I'm joined here with Jackie James from Boston College and Nancy Morrow Howell from Washington University. We'll be presenting our grand challenge on advancing long and productive lives. I have to admit that if I could change the title, and I have to say this every time, but if I could change the title to our grand challenge, I would include healthy, to advance long, healthy, and productive lives, because that's really, I think, at the heart of so much of our research and interests. We're currently at Boston University School of Social Work. Behind us is part of my office. As you can see, there are three of us, so we'll be moving the computer around, and so just bear with us when the camera moves. We have a full agenda, as you can see here. I'll lead us off with an overview of the Grand Challenge and current activities. Jackie will then jump in and talk about employment. Nancy Morrow Howell will then give us an update and an overview about caregiving and volunteering. I'll come back into the picture with some conceptual approaches that we've been utilizing, really just an overview over the past 2 decades. And then we'll open it up for questions, comments, some reflections, and it'd be nice to hear all of your thoughts. As many of you know, we are living longer now than we have ever in the history of the human species. Recent studies suggest that half of all children that are born in Western societies will live to be at least 100 years of age. And the other half will be approaching 80 and 90 and potentially 100 years. In 2030, which is not too far from now, there will be approximately 1 billion people age 65 and older. And the implications are profound as you can reflect on these statistics. And aging is only part of the story. Another challenge is to reduce, if not eliminate, disparities in health that are a result of political, social, and economic conditions that are avoidable, that are unfair, unjust. Disparities ultimately undermine the capacity, the quality, and the potential of not just individuals, but also a society to be productive and successful, a successful age. Um, Often, when we think about aging or older adults, a number of words that start with the letter D come to mind. At the individual level, this is disease, death, depression, disability, dementia. And at the population level, we often think of national deficits and a strain on healthcare systems and an overburden to younger populations. Productive aging is really juxtaposed to this deficits perspective on population aging. And it tries to emphasize that older adults and aging are assets and can be utilized in a variety of ways to maximize health and well-being. We've noticed that the capacity of older adults has consistently increased with higher levels of education and social capital. There's evidence that the health span is also increasing. And older adults are in a particular life stage where generativity is really at their forefront, and they really want to give back in meaningful ways to society. So this is a strengths-based approach to trying to understand aging. We define productive aging by as any activity by an older individual that contributes to the production of goods or services, whether paid for or not. And we do have disputes, ongoing disputes, about which activities in particular to focus on. For our grand challenge, we really honed in on employment, formal volunteering, and informal caregiving. And if you all have any questions as to other roles, we can certainly have that conversation at the end. You'll see in the presentation by Jackie and Nancy in a moment that there are several potential outcomes and at various levels. We could have more experienced workers and informal caregivers. There's less reliance on retirement income. We could have a stronger civic society. When done right, we could have some intergenerational reciprocity. And we could really take on we could really take on the issue of generativity for folks, and we could postpone, and this is what really excites me, we could postpone physical, psychological, and cognitive declines through active engagement. I remember when I first spoke with my mother about productive aging, she asked what that was, and I told her the definition, and she quite literally slammed her hands on our kitchen table and said, "You expect me to work longer? You expect me to take care of your father longer, your sister longer, and you expect me to volunteer on top of this?" And at that moment, I know that generally when we say productive aging, uh, you know, we kind of don't squarely address the issues of heterogeneity and challenges that many people face in this context of trying to be productive, either because they need to or they want to. And so we've been very sensitive to this variability. And ultimately, from a social work perspective, we want to ensure that whatever social policies and programs that we're advancing, that it's sensitive to the capacity, to the preferences and the desires of a society that is very uneven when it comes with um, capacity, I suppose you can say. So these issues, these core principles, were consistently pushing for inclusion, of opportunity, of intergenerational harmony and choice, as opposed to elitism and constraint and forcing people to do these activities longer. It's how can we ensure the policies open up some opportunity for individuals. With regards to the current structure, Nancy and I have been trying to organize ourselves around it. We asked Jackie James to lead efforts regarding employment, Tina Matz Costa at Boston College to be the point person for volunteering, and Michelle Putnam at Simmons to lead the caregiving part. We've been our activities have been shaped by some strategic advisors, Linda Hurutin, Bob Hurutin, and Brian Lindbergh, to reach out not just within gerontological field, but beyond, and ask where we could get additional research support, how we could influence policies and programs, and how we could influence education. Denise Burnett and we at BCU have been very supportive, and we want to thank them, as well as Jane Lee, who is one of my phenomenal doctoral students here at Boston University, and she's the point person for doctoral students and MSW students. We've been producing some scholarly papers, and we just highlighted a few here. The Grand Challenge has also caught the intellectual imagination of other scholars in the area, and we reference them. But for the most part, our efforts have been around advocacy. Prior to the Grand Challenge, we had acquired a solid research base to inform policies and programs at the federal level, states, and within organizations. Jackie James has recently led efforts to co-sign a letter to Congress. She has over 100 signatures from researchers in aging, family, and work to support proposed legislation on paid family leave. This is something that we're very excited about. We also provide you, the viewer, with a few hyperlinks to take you to some other advocacy products that we've created. And finally, the issues that we raise in this Grand Challenge have become integrated in public discourse, including articles on minority aging, financial well-being, and the need and the struggle to work longer. We have had a few articles to really shape public discourse on federally funded programs. As many of you know, in this political context, there are so many programs that are about to be slashed. Their budgets are about to be cut, and the programs are going to go away. And these programs, and we highlight the context in the two articles in the bottom here, these federally funded programs really help at-risk older adults who need jobs and who want to be productively engaged. And so in those articles, we convey that these federally funded programs need to be evaluated, refined, sharpened, and but we don't need to scrap them. And so there are some efforts with the media. Within this 1 year alone, and we're not even done, we presented and recruited individuals from SWE. We've disseminated some teaching strategies at the USC Grand Challenge Conference in April. With support from the National Institute on Aging, Jackie and Nancy hosted a pre-conference that translated research to employment practices. Nancy and I also co-sponsored a breakfast meeting at an international conference, which was standing room only. That was exciting. And next on our agenda is the Teaching Institute at CSWE. At this institute, I just highlighted a few objectives here in the webinar. We really want students and other faculty members to see aging not from a deficits perspective, but certainly from an assets perspective. We're going to provide with participants some strategies of how to integrate this material into HubC, into policy courses. We're going to provide some vignettes on how to confront and grapple with issues of intergenerational conflict and equity. I believe we're going to have something on ageism as well. Ultimately, our goals are to ensure that we take a strengths-based perspective, a whole person perspective in teaching our students, that we identify important developmental milestones in which we could reshape health and economic trajectories. We're going to bring up the issues of intergenerational conflict and equity and deal with economic and social injustices. So I hope that you could join us at CSWE, and I'm happy to provide you with specific date and contact information on that. But that's my role now. Jackie's going to come on in and speak with employment. And
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending to this issue that we're talking about in terms of productive engagement in later life. As Ernest has just pointed out quite nicely, we're living certainly in a new context of aging. Since the early 1980s, the average age of retirement has been creeping up slowly but steadily. And we know that the most recent recession has affected the plans of today's retirement eligible adults. Although the numbers vary from study to study, a recent study showed the striking number that 79% of adults over the age of 25 think they're going to be working past the age of 65. I know most of you know this, but the normal retirement age became a phenomenon in the late 1800s when Otto von Bismarck instituted it in Germany, and Franklin Roosevelt took the idea in the US and suggested age 65 as the normal retirement age when life expectancy at the time was 61. And I should add that when his administration proposed the original Social Security Act, it was just as contentious as the Affordable Care Act is today. And it could be argued that it only passed because the legislators thought so few people would ever get to use it. Today, however, we know that the average life expectancy is 79, and that's the average, and a lot of people live longer than that. Ernest was talking about his mother. My own mother is 99 years old. As I mentioned, the numbers of people who plan to retire later and work longer just keep rising. And as you can see here in this slide, a lot of that has to do with financial need and also the need for employer-provided health insurance. But almost an equal number say that they have found their way to work that they enjoy and they want to keep using it. Keep doing it. I have said in a previous presentation that people have a universal need to feel useful, and work is one of the ways that they do that. To make that point a little stronger, this slide shows, in one sense, the financial side of why people need to keep working longer. Note that the median income of men under the age of 65 is just over $52,000 a year, which is not a lot of money for supporting a family and educating children and saving for retirement. So a lot of people really do need to work to continue to earn an income. And this is especially true of women. As you can see here, women earn significantly less than men regardless of age. And again, this slide shows graphically the importance of employer-provided health insurance. In this study, 63% of Americans get their health insurance this way. And I think these numbers have been changing slightly with the Affordable Care Act, but as we all know, that is in a vulnerable state. So the question becomes, well, should people work in retirement? Does work benefit older adults? And the answer, of course, differs for different kinds of people, as Ernest was pointing out. Different kinds of jobs, different kinds of people, different kinds of work that they do. But on average, it's easy to see that people who are able to work longer do enjoy greater financial security and, again, the health insurance that employers provide. They also receive higher benefits from Social Security if they can delay until the age of maximum pay, which is age 70 at the current time. Importantly, each year that people delay retirement replaces a year in which assets would have been depleted if retired. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that the level of assets needed in retirement is reduced by more than 50% if retirement is delayed from 62 to 66, and by nearly 90% if retirement is delayed from 62 to 70. And finally, we always point out that those who continue to work experience the non-financial benefits of work. In some work that I have done with other colleagues, we have shown that both men and women who continue to work, whether full or part-time, during the conventional retirement years have greater well-being psychologically than those who are fully retired. And there are many other studies showing this as well. But we get this question from reporters at least once a week. Won't they steal the jobs from younger workers? And this is indeed a complicated question to answer. Similar arguments were made about women's increased labor force participation in the 70s, but instead, the women's involvement in the workplace has been an economic boon and created rather than stolen jobs. And economists tell us with their rather elaborate statistical models, they have shown over and over again that throughout history, when older workers are continuing work, the economy grows. That said, I always have to say that there may be pockets within organizations where this is true, that some older worker is in a role that can't be filled until he or she leaves. And I'm sure we've all seen that situation. But on average, this is not the case that older workers are taking jobs away from younger workers. So a large percent of older adults want to cycle between work and leisure, or work part-time, or start a business, or do something entirely new. But the question becomes, can they? I've sort of been counting it as progress lately that in a recent survey by Transamerica, employers are finally starting to get it, this new context, and are seeing that their older employees do want to continue to work longer than they used to. So that's the good news. The bad news is, despite their recognition that many of their employees envision a flexible or phased transition into retirement, few employers have the kinds of programs in place to support them. Relatively few offer flexible schedules, or the ability to shift from full or part-time, or the possibility of switching to a less demanding position. And even when they do offer these programs on the books and the HR policies, they are seldom implemented to a broader range of employees. So although employers do expect workers to work longer, the employees themselves, as you can see here, do not feel supported in their efforts to do so. So what might help? At our center, we have created this sort of crazy quilt of job conditions that are essential to having a quality job. And they include the usual things of attractive and fair benefits and wellness, health, and safety. Just this week, a RAND report revealed that a majority of retirees would return to work under the right conditions. There are three in this crazy quilt that are particularly important to late career employees, and they are having opportunities for meaningful work. People want a job that makes them feel useful, that makes them feel they're contributing, that makes them that serves a sense of purpose. They also want to be involved in an organization where they are respected and included and not discriminated against. And most importantly, as I have just pointed out, they want to keep working, but they may want to work less. They may want to work more flexibly. They may want to change jobs even within an organization. So to close, I want to say that the importance of a job cannot be overstated. It remains important to many people in later life, and employers have a big part to play in making it possible for older adults to continue to work and be productive in the workplace. And we believe that doing so, providing these benefits for older workers, also benefits all ages of workers. So this is my stand, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
Thanks, Jackie. Good morning. I'm Nancy Morrow Howell. I'm at Washington University in St. Louis. And even though Tina and Michelle are leading our efforts in the area of caregiving and volunteering, they couldn't be with us this morning. So I'm going to overview this area of work in our productive engagement agenda, caregiving. Ernest pointed out that we focus on three activities that can be costed or have economic value to society: working, volunteering, caregiving. And he pointed out that we could argue that other activities could be included, but we have felt like to advance a more coherent agenda, we could focus on these three because they are very important to our society and they have clear outcomes for individuals and communities, not always good outcomes. So our goal might be to increase that contribution to society, but doing it under conditions that maximize the positive outcomes for older adults themselves. So caregiving and volunteering are both non-paid work, which is very important for us to consider as productive because of the clear benefits to society. The problem with caregiving is it's probably one of the hardest of these productive activities to influence through program and policy because it's such invisible work, it's such private work. Volunteering and working are clearly under the auspices of organizations, but caregiving happens in our homes. We're not even sure who is caregiving, much less how to reach them to support them in this very important work. When we're talking about caregiving in this productive engagement in later life agenda, we're focusing on older caregivers. You can see on the screen that about 35% of caregivers are between 50 and 64. We're concerned about them aging in this important role, but currently about 13% are over the age of 65, and this number is growing because the baby boomers now are moving into that age bracket, and the amount of caregiving that baby boomers are doing is very large. We also include custodial grandparenting, that very important unpaid work of raising our children. You can see that the numbers are impressive and they are also growing. In this time in our social history with high rates of incarceration and drug problems and mental disorder from poverty and underemployment, custodial grandparenting is on the rise, and figuring out ways to support this important work is what our agenda is about. Most caregivers are employed. Caregivers of all ages are employed, so they certainly affect the employment scene and make the work hard when people are doing the productive work in their employment agencies and taking care of people at home. Older adults are normally taking care of spouses, their older relatives, as the baby boomers are taking care of our parents, and adult kids with disability. All of this care has been costed, and you can see the value to society of this caregiving. In fact, our healthcare system depends on this caregiving. So we must find ways to help people do it. There is much, the literature is mixed. We have tended to focus on the negative effects of caregiving because there are some. There are clearly some. We're able to pick that up in even the stress response in the body of caregivers versus non-caregivers. So the list of negative outcomes is well documented. It takes a financial, a physical, and an emotional hit on people in these hard roles, depending on the circumstances. There's also literature that says, well, we continue to do it. We will continue to do it. We want to do it. We need help doing it, but we find it psychologically rewarding. And there's some evidence that shows that it does reduce the risk of mortality. So we're very concerned about the effects of this hard work on caregivers. And there's lots of programs that have been developed in response. Evidence-based programs, generally psychosocial programs, educational programs where support is involved. But the problem is most caregivers, because it's such a private, not under the organization, not under the auspices of an organization, they're not reached by these programs. Dissemination is our problem, implementation and dissemination. And there's not a heavily funded programs. Again, lots of our legislative history have seen caregiving as something we should do, something that we're expected to do. Why should we invest public money in something that's such a natural part of life? But there's plenty of evidence that these programs can help caregivers not only do a better job for a longer period of time, but do it in more healthful ways to themselves. And there's also employer-directed programs that Jackie knows a lot about, trying to provide education and support to caregivers. So I think the bottom line is we know how to help caregivers often. It's just that we do not have ways to reach caregivers and provide them the support they need. Policies are very promising in this realm. As Ernest and Jackie have mentioned, paid family leave to cover caregiving is around. Federally, there's programs. It's just workers aren't paid to take this time. At the state level, there's more paid family leave programs. And our grand challenge is working towards pushing paid family leave for caregiving. As Jackie said, and Ernest as well, there's lots of cuts on the horizon, depending on how the politics of this works out. But there has been the growth of participant-directed programs, Medicaid for low-income older adults needing care under Medicaid, and these programs allow the care recipient to pay family members to provide care, so that the family member who maybe has stepped out of the job force to provide care can have some sort of income. Now, this can't go to spouses, which is a large number of our older caregivers. There's also employer-based policies within an organization that can support training and education for caregivers. There's been legislation on the books for a while that has never been passed where Social Security credits for caregiving can be accrued. So instead of just stepping out of the workforce to take care of someone and having zero earnings being recorded on your Social Security history, that we would insert for a certain amount of caregiving credits so that there's not zero earnings. So you can see there's a lot of program and policy promise under caregiving. It's a matter of getting these policies passed and supported with funds and to getting the programs used. I'm going to turn to volunteering. Like caregiving, it is unpaid work. Like caregiving, it's unpaid, but unlike caregiving, it's when it's under organization, so it's a little more formal. It's a little more easy to control via programs. And I will overview a little bit about what we know about volunteering. The odd thing is older adults who step into, who exit the workforce or exit the workforce full-time gain some discretionary time. At that same time, they as a group, there's lower rates of volunteering than younger adults. We've attempted to understand that, and it's not health until later years. 75, 80-year-old folks are going to be able maybe begin to experience some mobility issues or getting around issues that might interfere with volunteering. But we have to take health off the table for something that we might be able to intervene immediately to get more people volunteering. The main reason is really disconnection from institutions. We volunteer because of our connection to educational and work institutions, and older adults become disconnected from those institutions. So nobody's asking them to get involved in an effort. So lack of facilitation, lack of expectation, and certain amount of age discrimination, age segregation in the way we think about civic service. So we argue that to increase volunteering, we're not going to focus on the individual. We're going to focus on programs, policies, and social expectations that would support older adults in these volunteer roles. Volunteering is the most discretionary of all the activities that we've been discussing. No one has to volunteer while they might have to work, and they might see that caregiving is not a discretionary activity. Therefore, it's kind of hard to document negative outcomes, but we can. Most of the outcomes are positive from volunteering, and very observable and documentable positive health and psychological effects and opportunity effects. So if people want to return to work or get involved in other organizations, volunteering is a great pathway to other types of engagement. We can document negative outcomes, and this is often associated with the organization that people are working for. They feel undertrained, they feel stressed out because of the work and they're not supported in the work, they feel under-recognized. So again, we can probably reduce negative outcomes by increasing the amount of facilitation that volunteers get. Programs, lots of programs, getting people connected to a good fit opportunity in their community, more and more online programs. Volunteer Match is a great one. Certain agencies in specific communities can outreach on an identified need, so we're focusing on intergenerational tutoring in some of the schools in St. Louis that were in the news in the last couple of years because of racial disparity and civil unrest. There's local and national campaigns. Encore.org has a program called Encore United, a media campaign to support local communities in increasing the number of older adults serving children. Finally, we have a lot of formal service programs that exist. There's issues that we need to talk about if we have time, but Experience Corps represents older adults coming into elementary schools, and there's AmeriCorps money, there's private money, there's grant money associated with the Experience Corps program. And Foster Grandparents represents a federal program where there's federal money coming in to have older adults placed in different organizations that serve children in need. So there's a lot of exemplary programs, but they are not evenly available, and they are underutilized because folks do not have an Experience Corps program in their community, for example, or do not know about the opportunities of foster grandparents. At the policy level, our Corporation for National and Community Services is under the gun right now for a lot of budget cuts, but it supports Senior Companion and AmeriCorps. And an increase in these programs would allow low-income older adults in the Senior Companion program, for example, to receive a stipend to serve their communities. So we're very concerned about some of the budget cuts that might be threatening our attempts to increase the number of older adults involved and the heterogeneity of older adults involved. The Serve America Act in 2009 required that AmeriCorps put X amount of its money to support older volunteers participating in AmeriCorps. We view AmeriCorps as a very youth-oriented type of program, but in fact, older adults can take advantage. And so there was a directive to that program to increase the number of older adults. And a nice little part of that legislation was if you know AmeriCorps the young folks in general in that program earn an educational stipend they can use when they're done serving towards their education. Older adults in the program earn that educational stipend as well, but this new act made that transferable, that they could give their educational stipend to their children, grandchildren, or foster children. Just an example of an incentive that can increase the support and recognition of older adults in these roles. There's examples of tax breaks at the local level for service. For example, a city could provide a property tax break for older adults that put X amount of time in the public school or at the public park, and there's examples of that around the country. We'd also advocate for work policies at the organizational level that support transitions between working and volunteering, companies organizing work efforts, particularly focused on making sure to include adults that are maybe nearing retirement age, because we know if people get involved before they retire, they're more likely to stay involved after they retire. So that's just a very brief overview of the activities, the non-paid work of volunteering and caregiving, and ways that we think about changing program and policy to not only maximally involve older adults, but to help ensure more positive outcomes as they undertake these important roles for our society. So with that, I'm going to give it back to Ernest.
Thank you, Nancy.
And he's going to go back to some of the way we think about these activities.
Yeah, thank you. Just very quickly, and I'm happy to offer some references for individuals, but social work researchers have been at the forefront of offering different conceptual frameworks to help guide empirical investigations, to discover the importance of antecedents as well as outcomes on these productive activities. The earliest conceptual framework was offered in 2001 by Michael Sheridan, Nancy Moore-Howell, Jim Hinterlong, and Philip Rosario. At the very bottom of the slide here, they identified social policies and socio-demographic factors that informed organizational capacity and individual capacity to working, volunteering, and caregiving. And they explicated outcomes all the way from the individual to the societal level. This framework represented a major advancement for the field to test hypotheses and associations at the micro and the macro levels. Throughout the years, others have offered and have emphasized meso-level factors, such as the built in the social environment that influences productive activities. This research is especially exciting because it highlights the importance of examining residential segregation by race, for example, the quality and the quantity of social and public services within neighborhoods, recreational space, walkability, crime and violence, safety issues. Older adults with physical limitations are especially vulnerable to disengagement and isolation because of barriers at the environmental level. And so that's exciting to examine. The latest conceptual frameworks emphasize life course determinants. That is, what people do in later life, what social, human, cultural capital, what resources they have acquired, that's been shaped across their lifetimes. And there's emerging evidence to suggest that the genes and environment interact across the lifespan, and that certain diseases, such as Alzheimer's disease, could be delayed and or prevented with good quality education and social activities that require cognitive and social stimulation. This model, more so than others, have emphasized prevention at early stages of life. And so as you can see, this grand challenge on productive aging acknowledges the importance of other grand challenges, such as ensuring healthy development for all youth, to reduce extreme economic inequality, and create social responses to a changing environment. And there's an opportunity for Grand Challenge members to work closely from a life course perspective to ensure that everyone has the capacity and the opportunities to live a long, healthy, and productive life with choices and opportunities. And so with that, we really open it up for questions and comments. Michelle, if that's possible.
Yes, so participants, if you have any questions for our presenters, feel free to unmute your mics. You can do that on the right side of the screen towards the bottom. There'll be a microphone that says audio off, and you just click that and it'll turn white and your audio will turn on. The other option is if you would also like the presenters to see you, you can also enable your webcams right below that. So with that, please bring any questions you have.
People might be figuring out how to unmute their computers.
Yes, and I forgot one other option is there's a chat box. So on the top right side of the screen, you'll see a square call out sign that says chat under it. If you have any questions, you can chat them as well, and I can read them out loud to our presenters.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Horace Ling. I'm from Harvard University. I'm a student here as well as a staff member. And I apologize, I wasn't able to listen to the whole presentation because I came in kind of late. But is there a lot of evidence that people hop back and forth between like working and retirement and volunteering and switching between these different roles within, society?
That's a very
Great
exciting
question.
and
It's very
really
exciting.
important question. I think a lot of our research has somewhat tapped that issue because as we presented it, we sort of presented them in isolation, employment, caregiving, volunteering, but there's a lot of um, co-occurrence that happens at the same time, a lot of substitution, if not the role completely, then a phase in and a phase out. It's really difficult to capture empirically and longitudinally, but we do have that capacity to do it. There's been a recent study by Ursula Stoudinger at Columbia that used sequence analysis to look at different profiles of individuals going in and out of the labor market, paid work, but which was already complicated enough. But there haven't been a lot of studies that take a look at the transitions between these three activities.
Well, Jackie probably knows the most about programs that support the transition.
Well, people definitely go back and forth between work and retirement. That's almost, it's amazing in the health and retirement study to see the number of times people leave one job, retire a few years, go back to a different job or a same job. So there's a lot of going back and forth between work and retirement. And volunteering, I don't know about. I think, what we've been seeing, and I think you know more about this than I do, but people who are volunteers, there are volunteers and there are non-volunteers. Isn't that right? So people who have volunteered all along are likely to volunteer in retirement.
Right. And I think the take home from that is it's easier to keep a volunteer in a role than to get a non-volunteer into a volunteer role. So we've been concerned about transitioning. I mentioned programs that help people get involved in volunteering in their work careers so that they'll continue as they transition. But how to support that transition when we talk to people about what are they going to do next if they leave this job, we need to help them transition smoothly to volunteering or other work. But volunteering, so work to volunteering, we can support through employers.
And they do.
And they do. And volunteering to work is a natural for people that want to work and they don't know what to do or how to get started. We recommend that they volunteer in an area that might be of interest because volunteering does lead to working. And we could use the volunteer setting more purposefully to help people find work as an incentive for volunteering more. Now, caregiving is what we have to be more worried about because, as we said, people leave the workforce to caregive and they stop gaining Social Security credits or they're not protected under a family leave. So how do we respect the job of caregiving so that employers, so the transition from work to caregiving back to work is more supported than it is now? So your question's a really important one for us thinking about these productive roles.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have another question or comment, or for the person who asked it, would you like to elaborate?
I don't want to hog the whole conversation, so I'll wait for about 10 seconds, maybe give someone else a chance to ask a question, and if no one does, I will come back in. How about that?
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm saying come back in.
All right. Nancy says come back in.
So I'm, like I said, a student here, and one of the projects I'm working on is thinking about people who are nearing retirement age or in retirement age and who are at the executive level in the leadership, and how these people can transition to a different role within their organization. We all know about people who are emeritus status or whatever, but how to help organizations and individuals transition so they can continue to be productive in that role, maybe in a different role, but in a significant role. Because, like you were saying, a lot of people go out and in because they still have a desire to be impactful and to share the knowledge they have. And I think organizations also want to keep these people involved. So I'm interested in research in that area, what kinds of information you might have, or sources of information.
Jackie.
Well, some organizations really do think about that, and they really do start talking with executives about what they'd like to be doing as they phase into a different part of life, maybe less work. So some organizations do make it possible for an executive to take on a project that they would like to do or a role with less responsibility as they phase into thinking about retirement and phasing out. Other organizations literally have what they call senior advisors, or people that they keep on their roles, pay for their certifications if they need those, so that they can come in and do special projects for X number of months a year. So, these are unusual employers. We call them early adopters because not a lot of employers are doing that kind of thing, but there are enough to talk about, and we have written about some of them.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
But I would like to add, because I think this is a really interesting area that we need to do better with. Jackie knows that there are programs, but I think a lot of these folks that you describe feel underutilized. Mm-hmm. And I think, as from an outside perspective, we are not utilizing that capacity right. Even at our university, where we have some folks who have stepped back from deanship roles, and the faculty is kind of like, well, now what am I supposed to do? There's so much experience there. And so we're using, with some of them that I work with, the word repurpose. How are you going to use your experience-based skills more maximally for this organization? Because in some of these roles, they can become pretty tangential, pretty discretionary roles. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a very fruitful area of thought of how to really maximally use senior folks in an organization, before they retire and then after they retire, for the sake of them really using their capacity. So I think it's a really good question, and I think we're just fiddling around the edges with it right now.
Yeah.
I actually know of an experience of someone who was a dean at a major university and was extremely successful fundraiser and wanted to keep that role. He wanted to not be dean anymore, but he wanted to keep active in the fundraising role.
Right.
And the new dean did not want the support of the old dean.
Yeah.
So I think that's a more typical story.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of exemplifies this loss of capacity because we're not sure how to utilize it yet.
And Steve, I would, one thing that comes up for me is, as we continue to focus on individuals with high levels of human capital, we're talking about a sizable population with high, education and that experience. I think we also need to consider, for these transitional periods, individuals who have had physically demanding jobs but have some skill set as well, and some strategies that they know work for them to work longer. So I get that there's a lot of executives out there that
Yeah,
need to work longer,
right.
but we need to help like other individuals do that as well.
Yeah, it's harder. For them.
It's hard.
More necessary.
So the importance of lifelong education and certification is really important in that context.
Yeah.
I'm going to put my into the chat box because I'd love to continue to engage with you guys on this topic and others that you might come up with. I'm, taking some coursework on social entrepreneurship and strategic communications. So if it's possible, sometime we could either meet or continue to talk on the phone about this.
You're in Boston, and both of these folks are in Boston.
That's
We've
right.
got good colleagues in this area that are thinking about these issues of working and volunteering and caregiving.
We'd love to talk to you.
Absolutely. And there's our contact information.
Great.
Michelle, do we have other questions?
I do not see any more questions in the chat box.
Okay. So I think we could potentially wrap this up. Yeah. We are available. Please reach out to us. It's exciting work. I'm glad that you all have been able to participate this morning. And thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.